Mrs. Dean is telling the story now. It all started when she was 14 years old. She was the daughter of a servant at Wuthering Heights at the time, and Wuthering Heights was owned by a family called the Earnshaws. There was Papa Earnshaw, Mama Earnshaw, and their two kids, Hindley and Catherine. The other people in the house that you should know about is Mrs. Dean. As a child, she was 14 at the time, and Joseph, the OG Joseph that we met in part 1. Hindley, the eldest son, was 14 at the time, so he was the same age as Mrs. Dean. They actually grew up together, they were close. And the daughter, Catherine, was at the time 6 years old. One day, Papa Earnshaw said that he had business in Liverpool, so he had to go away for a few days, and he promised to bring the kids, including Mrs. Dean, some souvenirs. Mrs. Dean said that Papa Earnshaw was actually very nice to her, even though she was just a child of a servant at the time. But Papa Earnshaw wasn't this softy either. Papa Earnshaw could actually be very severe in his punishment, like he would drive people away from the house and just ask them to come back the next day. Anyway, Papa Earnshaw was going to Liverpool and he planned to walk the whole way to Liverpool and back. That was 60 miles each way, or 90.5 kilometers. So Papa went and it was 3 days before he came back. Mrs. Dean remembered that it was 11 o'clock at the time when he came home and he was carrying something. They unbundled that blanket that he was carrying and it was a boy. Papa Earnshaw brought home a boy. Mrs. Dean describes the boy as dirty, ragged, he had black hair, and he seemed to be a person of color. The book never tells us what kind of race exactly this little boy was. People in the book would call him a gypsy, which might suggest that he is of Roman heritage, but also he came from Liverpool, and at the time that was a hot spot for trade, including slave trade, and therefore it could be a big possibility as well that this little boy was of African descent. Papa Earnshaw said that he saw the little boy in the streets in Liverpool and he just couldn't help it. Nobody would claim this little boy as part of his family, and so Papa Earnshaw just scooped the boy up and took him home. The presents that Papa Earnshaw got for all of the kids, they were all broken in that journey because he had to take care of the boy more than taking care of the gifts. And that was the beginning of turmoil in the Earnshaw family. Mama Earnshaw, for one, she wasn't happy. She was like, we have enough mouths to feed in this house. Why would you add another one? Hindley was so upset about his souvenir being broken, and Catherine just spat at this little boy. But the family kept the little boy anyway, and this little boy was soon named Heathcliff. It was supposed to be the name of another baby in the family who died, so I don't know the psychology of giving this little boy who they looked down upon the name of that baby, but also they didn't give Heathcliff a last name. He wasn't Heathcliff Earnshaw, he was just Heathcliff, like Madonna or Beyonce. Mama Earnshaw died 2 years after Heathcliff's arrival into the family, and over the years, Heathcliff and Catherine became very close. They were playmates, they grew up together, they were best friends. But the rest of the house resented Heathcliff, especially Hindley. Hindley hated Heathcliff like the rest of the house did. The rest of the house were kind of resentful because this is a stranger that came in. He wasn't even a servant. He was being taken care of by Papa Earnshaw. And I think there's like classism or racism in there because he was a person of color. But Hindley, he has a bigger grudge because Heathcliff quickly became Papa Earnshaw's obvious favorite. Hindley was like, I'm supposed to be the only son, and so I'm supposed to be your favorite son, but I'm not. So Hindley would beat up Heathcliff. He would bully Heathcliff around the house, and in turn, Heathcliff wouldn't react. Every time that Hindley would punch Heathcliff, Heathcliff would yelp because it hurt. But it would be the kind of yelp like, oops, I ran into this pole, or I ran into your fist for some reason, and he wouldn't complain. But Heathcliff, don't get me wrong, Heathcliff is not the hopeless martyr angel boy either. Make no mistake, He knew that he was Papa Earnshaw's favorite. He knew that people resented him, and he knew how to get what he wanted. Like one time, Papa Earnshaw bought the kids horses, but Heathcliff wanted Hindley's horse, so he went up to Hindley and said, "Give me your horse, or else I will tell your dad that you hit me, and I will show him this bruise that you gave me last week." And so Hindley didn't have a choice. Hindley still beat up Heathcliff for it, but Heathcliff didn't complain, and at the end of the day, Hindley still gave Heathcliff his horse. Papa Earnshaw didn't see all this blackmail that Heathcliff was doing to Hindley. Heathcliff was very smart, but also Papa Earnshaw saw that Heathcliff was being beat up, and so that made Papa Earnshaw love Heathcliff even more. Papa Earnshaw wasn't the only one that loved Heathcliff. Catherine also really loved Heathcliff. There was no contest there. She didn't really vie for Papa Earnshaw's approval or favoritism. Catherine didn't mind Heathcliff being the favorite, but it was hard to be the favorite, not when she was such a brat. Catherine tested everyone's patience around the house. She was a little firecracker. She liked to order everyone around the house. She even slaps people. And she got away with most of it too, because she had the most beautiful eyes and sweetest smile. She could be very obnoxious one moment because that's her natural state, and the other moment she could be the sweetest girl if she needed to get out of trouble. But Papa Earnshaw pretty much saw right through all of that. He would tell her that he couldn't love her because of her attitude. And Catherine, she was just a young kid. She used to cry over that before. I mean, that was pretty harsh to say to a child, right? But over time, Catherine had gotten used to it, and she even embraced it. Catherine seemed like she was the happiest when everyone was scolding her at the same time, because then she could defy everyone with her attitude. Pretty much nothing got to Catherine at this point, but her weakness was Heathcliff. The only way that you could bother Catherine, the only way that you could get to her, was to take Heathcliff away from her. That was the worst thing that anyone could do. She loved Heathcliff so much, and Heathcliff felt the same way to Catherine as well. This boy would do anything for her. Fast forward to the year when Catherine was 12 years old, that's 6 years after Heathcliff came, Papa Earnshaw passed away. He had been sitting in a chair beside the fireplace, and Catherine was a little sick at that time, so she was uncharacteristically sweet. She was subdued because she didn't feel well. Papa Earnshaw even asked Catherine why she couldn't be sweet like this all this time, and Catherine's reply was, "Well, why can't you be a good man all the time?" Papa Earnshaw naturally started to get really annoyed again, but Catherine started being sweet, like kissing her dad's hand and singing to him, and that calmed Papa Earnshaw down, and he eventually fell asleep. It was a while before they realized that Papa Earnshaw was actually gone. They've been hanging out in the living room for a while, and eventually they had to go to bed, and they tried to wake Papa Earnshaw up so that he could go up to his bedroom, and he just wouldn't wake up anymore. Catherine, Heathcliff, and Mrs. Dean wailed into the night. They were all heartbroken and scared. They were all just kids at that point still. After a while, Mrs. Dean had to go get Dr. Kenneth, the family's doctor, and she found Catherine and Heathcliff alone in a room, and they were comforting each other. Mrs. Dean remembered that they were so young and innocent and hopeful. They were talking to each other about what heaven might be like and what Papa Earnshaw might be doing there right now. Mrs. Dean remembered thinking that as long as these two kids had each other, they were going to be okay. Hindley came home for the funeral. He actually had been off to college then, so he wasn't at home anymore. And when he came home with a secret wife. Apparently, Hindley had gotten married while he was off in college, and he didn't tell anyone. Hindley's wife's name was Frances, and to be fair to her, in the beginning, she was actually quite pleasant. She was excited about having a little sister, so she gave a lot of attention to Catherine. Frances would give Catherine presents and she would play with her. But eventually, Frances got bored with Catherine and she started to get irritated around the house very quickly. She was even mean to Heathcliff, and that gave Hindley even more reason to punish Heathcliff. Hindley never really got over his hate over Heathcliff. Hindley took this chance to arrange things the way he wanted to around the house. Heathcliff, for one, was asked to work in the farm, and he wasn't allowed to be homeschooled anymore. So when Papa Earnshaw was alive, Heathcliff and Catherine went to school together. There was a homeschool teacher that came to the house and taught them. But with Hindley now in charge of the house, Heathcliff was basically just a farmhand now. Also, servants weren't allowed to hang out in the main house anymore. They used to be allowed to, like Mrs. Dean would hang out around the house, but they weren't allowed to anymore. They had their place inside the house, literally. And Heathcliff didn't mind being relegated as a servant at first. Catherine would still teach him what she learned with a tutor, and she and Heathcliff would run off to the moors together to hide and play all day. They would skip church, skip school, skip all their chores, and they would get punished. Heathcliff would get beaten up by Hindley, and Catherine would not be given dinner. But both of these kids would just laugh at their punishment, and they would keep running off over and over again. They were happy as long as they had each other. Mrs. Dean, on the other hand, she wasn't happy. She would sometimes cry over how everything was going on because she saw these two kids becoming more and more wild and rude and vulgar, while Hindley, her playmate, her friend, turned into this weird, mean tyrant in the house. The family was not really behaving like a family anymore. I mean, it's true that Hindley and Frances were in love and happy, but they were making the rest of the house miserable. One day, Mrs. Dean realized that it was late and the two kids have not come back home yet. They had sneaked off to the moors as usual to play, but normally they would already be back at this time. The house waited for the two kids, but eventually Hindley said, "Close all the doors, lock up everything for the night, and when Catherine and Heathcliff tries to come home, that's their problem. They can't come in anymore. Let them fend for themselves." But Mrs. Dean couldn't bear it. She stayed up and secretly looked out for the kids. She was looking out a window and waiting for any sign of them to come home. Eventually, Heathcliff came back, but no Catherine. So Mrs. Dean secretly let Heathcliff into the house and asked him, "Where's Catherine? What happened?" Heathcliff said that they were out in the moors playing as usual, and they decided to go up to Thrushcross Grange and have a look at how rich people lived. They knew that there was a family living in Thrushcross Grange. It was the Lintons. There was Papa Linton, Mama Linton, and two kids, about the same age as they were. And they just wanted to go and see what the house looked like and how these people lived. They weren't friends with the kids at all. So Catherine and Heathcliff peeked through the window and saw the lavish white ceiling with gold trim and chandeliers. And there were two kids fighting over a puppy. So those were the two Linton kids. Catherine and Heathcliff laughed at them because they looked so pathetic. The kids heard the noise. They heard a weird noise outside of the window, and so they were scared. They didn't know that it was just Catherine and Heathcliff, their neighbors. Catherine and Heathcliff decided to jump on that chance and make even more scary noises outside the window to scare those kids. But all that did was that the adults were also alerted to the fact that there were weird noises outside of the house, and they unleashed the dogs on them. They didn't know it was just two kids, and the bulldogs chased after Catherine and Heathcliff. The two kids ran, and a bulldog got a hold of Catherine's ankle. It bit her for real. And Heathcliff said Catherine didn't even yelp, she didn't even make a noise. Her pride would not let her show any weakness. All Catherine did was ask Heathcliff to keep running and just leave her behind. But Heathcliff didn't run away, and eventually the adults of the house came out and found out that it was Catherine, their neighbor, and they just wounded their neighbor. So the Lintons said they would make this right. They would take her in and take care of her until she's all healed up. They forbade Heathcliff to come into the house with Catherine. They were like, ew, servant boy, go back to Wuthering Heights. You can't stay here. We'll take care of Catherine. And of course, Heathcliff didn't go home right away. He stayed outside the window and kept peeking through to check if Catherine was really okay. And it looked like she had the whole family under the palm of her hand. Heathcliff told Mrs. Dean at the time that the family looked to Catherine with stupid admiration. She looked and exuded superiority over everyone. They were bringing her snacks and toys and wheeling her around everywhere. It looked like she was enjoying herself, so Heathcliff just went home. It was a whole 5 weeks before Catherine's ankle healed and she was able to come home. Heathcliff wasn't allowed to visit her the entire time, and when Catherine arrived, she had changed. Her hair, her silk clothes, her hat were all posh and delicate. It was so different from her everyday because she was crawling around the moors basically. This Catherine was delicate. She was behaved. Catherine was happy to be back. She didn't hug Mrs. Dean even though she was happy to see her because Mrs. Dean was covered in flour at the time and Catherine's clothes might get dirty. She just gave Mrs. Dean a gentle little kiss, which was very unlike her. And Hindley and Francis were fussing all over Catherine because she looked like a doll, honestly. She looked so precious. Heathcliff, in the meantime, he was hiding in the back. Hindley called to him. He was like, say hi to Catherine like the rest of the servants. Shake her hand, go ahead. But as soon as Catherine saw Heathcliff, she ran and grabbed him and hugged him and kissed him on the cheeks. Heathcliff at this point had not bathed or changed his clothes for at least weeks, plural weeks. But Catherine didn't care. She just went and hugged him and kissed him anyway. But she did joke about it. She was like, hey, could you take a shower? And she even looked at her hands and clothes to check if anything was dirty. But Heathcliff's pride and shame couldn't take that. He was like, well, you didn't need to touch me. And then he ran away. Heathcliff kept working for the rest of the day. He even skipped dinner because he didn't feel like it. He didn't come home. Catherine, in the meantime, she didn't really look for him to play in the moors like she would normally do. She was busy for the rest of the day because the Earnshaws have invited the Lintons to spend Christmas Day with them. And that was the next day. Christmas was the next day. But Catherine did go by the kitchen a few times throughout the day to check on Heathcliff, but he wasn't there. Heathcliff didn't come home till very late that night. And the next day, Catherine checked in on him the next morning, first thing, but Heathcliff was already out working at the time. Catherine cried for Heathcliff. She didn't know what his problem was. She was so confused. And just before Christmas dinner, Heathcliff finally went into the kitchen and approached Mrs. Dean. He was like, okay, Nellie. Nellie is basically what they called Mrs. Dean because they were basically the same age. He said, Nellie, can you make me look nice? I want to look nice for Christmas dinner. And Mrs. Dean was like, about time. You have worried Catherine enough. She even cried for you. And Heathcliff said, well, he cried too, but he had better reasons to cry. So Mrs. Dean tried to comfort Heathcliff. She said, it's your pride, isn't it? You feel like you're not good enough? You feel like you're not as good as those Linton kids? Well, you shouldn't feel that because if you just cleaned up, you will look even better than the Linton kids. See? Now that you've cleaned up, you look so handsome. You look like a prince. And you're tougher than those kids too. You're not spoiled. You don't cry for your mommy for everything. You're younger than that Edgar Linton, but you're taller than he is. You're even stronger than he is. And the truth was, Heathcliff did look handsome, and Mrs. Dean had comforted him enough to look almost pleasant. Heathcliff wasn't scowling anymore, and he looked good-natured for once, and that made him look even better. So Heathcliff was ready, and he was about to walk out of the kitchen and into the sitting room, into the party, when Hindley came into the kitchen. He took one look at Heathcliff and was like, "What are you doing? You're not invited to the party. You're just gonna put your fingers into the tarts like an uncultured rat." Hindley ordered Joseph to keep Heathcliff out of the party. Apparently, it was also one of the requests by the Lintons. They wanted Heathcliff out of the party too. But Mrs. Dean was there. She tried to defend Heathcliff. She was like, "No, he's going to behave. He deserves to be in the party too." But Edgar Linton, one of the Linton kids, was right there behind Hindley. He piped up and insulted Heathcliff's hair. He said something along the lines of Edgar's hair being so long it looks like horse's hair, which honestly I would have taken as a compliment, but obviously Edgar didn't mean that as a compliment. So Heathcliff grabbed the first thing his hands could reach, which was hot applesauce, and he threw it at Edgar Linton's face. Hindley dragged Heathcliff away to beat him up. Meanwhile, Catherine and Isabella Linton, the other Linton kid, rushed to the kitchen because they heard the commotion. And Catherine, when she figured out what happened, she was furious at the Lintons. She was like, "You shouldn't have spoken to him. You know I hate it when he gets beaten up. Why would you even speak to him, Edgar?" And Edgar was crying. He was, by the way, almost the same age as Hindley. He even lied. He said, "I didn't even say anything to him." And Isabella started crying too. And Catherine was like, "Would you two stop crying? Edgar, were you killed just now? And Isabella, nobody even said anything to you." And with that, they were ushered to dinner. Catherine tried to keep her composure at dinner. She didn't really show very much emotion. She was just playing along. She was eating. But Mrs. Dean caught her purposefully dropping her fork so that she could cry under the table. Eventually, there was music and dancing, and Catherine excused herself to listen to the music elsewhere. She was like, "I want to listen to it upstairs because the music carries better up there." But Mrs. Dean, she knew what was up, and she knew that Catherine was going upstairs to see Heathcliff. So Mrs. Dean followed Catherine because she wanted to be backup. She wanted to be a lookout. At first, Catherine just stayed outside the room trying to talk to Heathcliff, and Heathcliff wouldn't let him in. And Mrs. Dean was busy being a lookout. But eventually, when she came back, she found out that Catherine had actually climbed out of the window into a skylight so that she could enter Heathcliff's window. Mrs. Dean heard them just talking inside Heathcliff's room, and eventually Catherine was able to sneak Heathcliff out of his room so that he could have dinner in the kitchen. He hadn't eaten in almost 2 days at this point. Catherine, in the meantime, had to go back to the party before people missed her. So Mrs. Dean went into the kitchen with Heathcliff so she could give him some food, and Heathcliff wouldn't eat very much. He looked deep in thought. He was just staring at the fire, and when Mrs. Dean asked him what he was thinking, he said he was just thinking about how he could get his payback on Hindley. He didn't care how long he needed to wait, but he will do it. Eventually, he would get his payback. And the only thing he wishes right now was that Hindley doesn't die before he could get his revenge. And that was the origin story of Heathcliff. See you again in part 3.